Hello, everybody. Hello, Libby.
Hi.
So, I mean this, I'm doing 3 of these things today, but the one that I'm most excited about is this. And in full disclosure, 60 Minutes has worked with Libby's group before to help get the word out around important issues, not just around climate change. And I'll just tell you that Libby and the people at Whistleblower Aid are the lifeblood of a democracy. They stand up for people who want to tell the truth when really the odds are against people telling the truth, especially around difficult subjects. And so we're all very lucky to be here with Libby today and chatting about these important things. So let's start with, Libby and I have talked a number of times to prepare for this. And one of the most interesting things that you said to me that I had frankly never heard before is right now where we're living, how we're living, everybody's trying to recycle. I just got an electric car. People are trying to do their part. And it's a term that Libby used called greenwashing. And I was wondering if we could just start right there. It's sort of a macro thought about where we are in climate change as a society and what we understand about it.
Well, sure, Bill, thank you. So greenwashing is a term that's applied to many things in the climate change arena, but the specific thing that we were talking about is a pretty insidious campaign that has been perpetrated by the polluters of the world with the help of high finance consultants and ad companies to make everybody feel like if we just do our part, we're going to turn this climate change thing around. And it's just not true. It's very clever because people, human nature, feels like we don't want to be impotent, right? So we're terrified of what's happening to the planet, but we also don't want to feel like we're helpless to stop it. So this whole notion of everybody recycling and picking up after themselves and using electrical cars, it's great, it doesn't hurt, but it's not going to fix the problem. And it's a very clever diversionary tactic where, combined with their ad campaigns about how they're part of the solution and not part of the problem, it really pushes responsibility away from the people who are culpable. And if we're focused on ourselves and are doing our part, we're going to be less focused on who's actually driving these very bad, destructive actions. Their PR campaign saying, we're going to go for zero carbon emissions by X a year in the future. That's bullshit because that means just between now and then, they're going to frack the hell out of the earth, right? So all of these kinds of narratives that are meant to keep us happy and feeling like we're doing our part and that maybe the world won't be destroyed, it's all part of a campaign.
It's a big ad campaign.
It's a big ad campaign. Lots of people got rich.
To be a whistleblower takes a lot of guts. And you have said no one should have to risk their career or their freedom to follow their conscience. Give us a sense of what it's like for a whistleblower when someone presents themselves to you. First of all, it's done anonymously. I mean, they come to you under some protection, but let's just give the audience a sense of what it's like when some brave soul steps forward and asks for your help.
I mean, the most important thing to understand is that by the time they reach out to us, they've already been through a traumatic event. Because most of the time, the people that are forced to keep secrets for their employers, their agency, or their corporation have been struggling for some time before they get to the moment when they realize that they can't stay silent anymore. So that entire period is just trauma. In the case of some of the Facebook whistleblowers that were coming forward during the Rohingya genocide, they couldn't stand watching Facebook amplified the ethnic cleansing and terrible narratives that were justifying and rationalizing genocide. So when you're keeping somebody secret and it's making you sick, I mean, literally, whistleblowers, they can't sleep at night. They don't know who they can talk to because of retaliation. So it's extremely traumatic. By the time they come to us, you know, they're pretty much experiencing some level of PTSD. And for good reason. I mean, the people in power, the people that are forcing them to keep secrets, do convey how important it is that they keep the secret.
Right.
So the weight of the corporation, sometimes the weight of, you know, their friends are working there, they don't want to destroy their friends' livelihoods. I mean, there's just so much there on top of not having a job, being blackballed in the industry, no health care for your children. I mean, there's just so much going on before a person says, I have no choice. I can't do this anymore.
So you and I also talked about this era that we're living in, which is, some people have called it a post-truth world. I would argue that you could make a fairly strong argument around climate change being one of the first issues where truth didn't matter in debate. You had scientists, empirical evidence being challenged by people who were funded in many parts by, you know, big petrol and gas and oil. And it raised questions within, you know, just the citizens' mind of whether or not this is really proven or not. How difficult is it then for a whistleblower around climate change to come forward, perhaps with empirical documents and science, to then make their case in a time like this?
It's shocking that we're living in a post-truth world, because when I was growing up in the ancient days, you know, fact-based evidence mattered. But if you look at the playbooks of tobacco, for example, which is the same playbook that the oil companies use, it's cover up any bad research, right? Deny and use counter science. But in the climate change example specifically, it was from the get-go, when there was research demonstrating that, you know, doing this would hurt the ozone, the environment, etc., the oil companies put a lot of money in debunking that science. And, you know, if you can't believe in science, how are you going to make impact with evidence about climate change? So, for example, during the Trump years, they actually took down the climate change part of the EPA website. And they removed human-caused climate change from every piece of written material at the EPA. So, I mean, it's so dramatic how much truth can be undone and falsehoods can be presented as truth now. I think it's terrifying for whistleblowers who don't know if, you know, even if we've got a smoking gun that says, you know, we know that we are destroying, you know, this lake or this, you know, environment, the deniers will just say it's not true. Right. And because we're living in a world where people believe what they want to believe, it's much harder to prove things empirically factual.
Fake news.
Yeah, everything's fake news.
Right.
And, you know, considering what they did when we actually believed the news,
right,
it's so much worse now.
Yeah, it is. I would agree with you. What do you think is, or from what section of the climate change, so climate change is a lot of things, right? It's science, there's politics, there's industry. Where do you think that the next big shoe might drop in terms of a whistleblower? And is that even possible to maybe forecast?
I think it is impossible to forecast, and this is something we talked about a lot, Bill, that, you know, it takes a village to ruin the planet. And so I think it's really important that people understand we're not just talking about oil and gas, right? We're talking about consulting companies that are paid to spin what their companies are doing. We're talking about financial institutions that are not assigning proper risk to climate-related issues. We're talking about advertising companies that are creating all these, Exxon, the solution of the future, those kinds of messaging to try to convey all of this misinformation to change the public opinion so that we're not driven by the desperation of our time to actually do something meaningful. People are scared and they would rather think, oh, maybe it's not so dire. Maybe if everybody pitches in and we recycle, then it's all going to be fine. It's not going to be fine.
When you and I were talking earlier, it was very interesting to me. I was asking about international partnerships and even if there were offices for Whistleblower Aid internationally. And you told me that actually the United States is the only place that has whistleblower laws, which to me was really interesting because the EU has been very progressive on things like privacy and the internet, et cetera, but you're working with international friends, alliances to change that. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think that some of the outcomes of the work we're doing, predominantly we're doing it for the whistleblowers, right? Because we want courageous people to be able to enact positive social change. But also, every time one of these whistleblowers comes out and really changes the game in whatever field they're coming out in, it gives governments across the world an appreciation for why whistleblowers are important and why they need protection. Because it is a very dangerous road. It is a very tough decision to make, but thank God there are people that really want to do good and are willing to take a risk to do that.
What kind of, talk about, you've dealt with dozens and dozens and dozens of whistleblowers. What sort of trauma do they go through when they step forward and they take on a big company? What do you see personally?
The first traumatic thing is realizing that the company that you work for is not doing good things. The second lesson is you're expected to protect their lies, right? And then it goes from there. Then you know that, if you were to come out and bring evidence out, that you'd be hurting the company, you'd be hurting your friends, you'd be a pariah, you'll be blackballed. Chances are you won't be able to get another job, no matter how good you are. I know at least one whistleblower from a very big worldwide consulting company that was told that she was going to help her clients do the right thing with climate, and then she discovered she was just helping them spin the wrong thing for climate, and she's now doing documentary filmmaking. You have to be prepared for way trauma. Some are sent to prison, some are prosecuted criminally, some are caught up in courts with civil litigation because of an NDA they signed. Some of the attacks are very personal. I've seen corporations do these packages of shame kind of things and pitch them to media companies to see who's going to bite, because it's salacious and it'll get eyeballs, but it's evil, insidious, and wrong.
Yeah. You, a couple of answers ago, broke down all of the various sectors, places where a whistleblower could come forward around climate change, and one of the things you talked about was financial institutions. Let's just spend a second on that. How is a financial institution, or how could a whistleblower from a financial institution have an impact?
Well, so for example, there's a movement now that the big public accounting firms should be held liable if they approve financial statements from companies that have not properly valued the danger that they're in terms of transition risk. If they have to go from oil and gas and coal to clean energy. So that's a cost that ought to be contemplated in financial statements, as well as physical risk. So if what you're doing is destroying a town, what is your legal obligation later on, and how does that affect your bottom line? So it's very important that financial institutions are honest And there are too many incentives for them not to be.
Also, let's talk about the government's support for what you do. You mentioned to me that you do have people who you trust in the government, in Congress and the Senate, who stand by you, who know the work is important. How important is that, and what more can be done to support whistleblowers?
I think it's really important that people in every industry understand how important whistleblowers are, because without them, we would never get the insights that we need. Because there's always an asymmetry of power. The people in power want the people not in power to protect their secrets so that they can continue to be in power. So it's not natural for somebody who's not in power to come out and take these risks. So we need to incentivize them and give them protections. And that's really important. And one of the aspects of the SEC protections, which are very, very rigorous for any publicly traded company, is whistleblowers protected against retaliation. So what if you're no longer working there, right? Because for you to have the courage to come forward, you actually had to take yourself out of that employment situation.
Right.
So the protections that the SEC gives against retaliation, there needs to be consideration that they should apply to former employees as well. Because their punishment is not limited to your employment.
Right. Did you see, I'm just curious, you brought up the Trump administration. Did you see a dip in political or government whistleblowing during the Trump administration as compared to other?
No, I don't think so. I think that there was a rise, because things in Washington have a certain rhythm, and that rhythm was broken. It was so non-traditional, that administration, that I think that we saw a big rise in whistleblowing.
Yeah, and I can tell you that 60 Minutes has had whistleblowers on Democratic administrations, Republican administrations. So, final question. This has been about climate whistleblowing. Without giving away a lead or a secret, or obviously putting anybody in jeopardy, what can we expect in terms of whistleblowing in the near future around climate change? I know you have...
I think that there's going to be some coming forward, and I think it's going to be pretty significant. I mean, one of the positive things is that the House is doing a lot of investigation and interviewing of people from all kinds of industries. So it's not just your traditional oil and gas scientists that are being interviewed now about climate change. It's all these people in the financial industry, the ad agency, high tech, big tech. Anybody who is involved at all in the pipeline of the problem, creating it, or the covering up of the problem. Those are all ripe areas for whistleblowers to come forward.
Excellent. Thank you for everything you do. Thank you to the audience for coming. And there's your lead. The next time you see a climate change shoe whistleblower drop, you heard it first here. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Great job.
Thanks, Bill.